Kateri Nalin moved through the polished halls of Everest Medical, a ghost in scrubs, her presence as understated as the pristine white gloves that never left her hands. A rookie nurse, she was easily overlooked, especially now, as the hospital hummed with a frantic energy centered on room 307. There, General Idris Baraka, a living legend etched with the scars of 100 battles, lay dying. His body, once a fortress, was betraying him. A rare, virulent infection tore through a recent burn graft, defying every cutting-edge treatment Everest's top minds could conjure. Dr. Vargas, the charismatic head surgeon, masked his growing panic with practiced calm. Dr. Wei, the sharp head of medicine, pored over data, her analytical mind hitting an impossible wall. The unspoken truth hung heavy. General Baraka was slipping away, his life ebbing with each failed intervention. His family's faces, etched with a raw, desperate fear, mirrored the despair of the medical team. But as Kateri watched, a flicker of something ancient and knowing passed through her eyes, a silent promise to the dying hero that perhaps, just perhaps, they hadn't tried everything yet. Everest Medical Center was a temple to modern medicine, all polished chrome, hushed efficiency, and the faint, sterile scent of success. But within the hushed sanctity of room 307, the illusion fractured. Here, the hum of cutting-edge technology was drowned out by the rising crescendo of a dying man's struggle and the mounting tension of doctors staring into an abyss of their own making. Dr. Mateo Vargas, a man whose surgical prowess was matched only by his charisma, moved with the effortless grace of a born leader. His presence alone could calm a frantic family, and his pronouncements carried the weight of divine decree. Yet, even his practiced smile was beginning to fray at the edges. Another round of broad-spectrum antibiotics, escalate the immunosuppressants, he'd commanded, his voice a bomb over the taut silence, but his eyes, when he thought no one was watching, betrayed a flicker of something close to terror. The general's skin, once a canvas of burnished bronze from countless suns, was now a mottled testament to his body's betrayal, the new grafts a festering landscape of virulent rejection. Dr. Wei, head of medicine, was Vargas's intellectual counterpoint. Analytical, sharp, she was a woman who trusted data above all else. Her office was a fortress of scientific papers and diagnostic readouts, each line a potential solution, each graph a clue. But the general's case defied all logic. Wei's brow was perpetually furrowed as she scrutinized monitors, her fingers flying across keyboards, searching for an anomaly, a pattern, anything that made sense. Her skepticism was a formidable shield, deflecting any suggestion that lacked empirical evidence, and her gaze, when it fell upon Kateri, was a silent challenge to produce anything more than intuition. Kateri, meanwhile, was a ghost in the gleaming hallways. She performed her duties with quiet precision, her gloved hands efficient and gentle, her eyes observing far more than anyone gave her credit for. She changed dressings, administered medications, and monitored vitals, each touch a silent prayer, each observation a growing alarm. During rounds, as Vargas held court, detailing the day's desperate strategies, Kateri's gaze kept returning to the subtle nuances of General Baraka's condition. The way the skin around the rejected graft had a peculiar, almost waxy sheen, different from the expected inflammatory response. The faint, metallic tang in the air that no amount of ventilation seemed to dissipate. The way the general's eyes, when he was lucid for a brief moment, held a flicker of resignation that Kateri felt in her own gut. Nurse Nalin, ensure the 4 lines are perfectly positioned for the next infusion, Vargas instructed, his tone polite but dismissive, preempting any unsolicited input. He'd barely glanced at her as he spoke, his attention already back on the complex discussion with Wei about potential cytokine storm interventions. Kateri cleared her throat almost imperceptibly. Dr. Vargas, Dr. Wei, she began, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I've noticed a specific quality to the exudate from the primary rejection site. It seems more viscous, and the tissue texture feels unusually rigid beneath the dressing, even for extensive fibrosis. She hesitated, steeling herself. It's not quite what we'd expect from a typical bacterial or fungal presentation. Vargas paused, a faint eyebrow arching. He turned, his smile still present, but now tinged with a patronizing amusement. Nurse Nalin, your observations are commendable for a rookie. However, we have a full pathology report indicating several highly aggressive strains. Perhaps your field 4 tissue needs a bit more seasoning. His tone, though gentle, was a sharp dismissal, effectively trivializing her insight into a naive impression. Dr. Wei merely glanced up from her tablet, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. Nurse, we have the most advanced diagnostic imaging and lab analysis available globally. If there were an atypical presentation beyond what our tests show, we'd have it. Trust the data. Her voice was precise, unyielding. Kateri felt a flush creep up her neck. Her insights, born of a different kind of experience, were utterly alien to their world of empirical evidence and surgical dogma. She retreated, her observations shelved, her warnings unspoken. But as the day wore on, and the general's fever spiked, his breathing growing shallower, the unique rigidity she'd felt in the compromised tissue seemed to intensify. The metallic tang in the air, a scent Kateri knew from a nightmare past, grew stronger. She watched, helpless, as the general's life force dimmed, the vibrant spark in his eyes fading into the graying canvas of his skin. Despair, cold and sharp, began to prick at her own carefully constructed composure. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they were looking at the wrong map entirely. The metallic tang in the air, a scent Kateri knew from a nightmare past, grew stronger. She watched, helpless, as the general's life force dimmed, the vibrant spark in his eyes fading into the graying canvas of his skin. Despair, cold and sharp, began to prick at her own carefully constructed composure. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they were looking at the wrong map entirely. The shift continued its agonizing crawl. Dr. Vargas, his usual bravado now thinly stretched, paced the room like a caged tiger. Dr. Wei, ever the pragmatist, initiated a new, aggressive immunotherapy protocol, a cutting-edge treatment designed for recalcitrant graft rejections. This should turn the tide, she declared, more to herself than to the anxious room, her gaze fixed on the monitors displaying the general's weakening vitals. It's the most powerful intervention available globally. Kateri watched as the specialized 4 drip began its slow infusion. A knot tightened in her stomach. She'd seen therapies like this. Potent. Broad spectrum. But if the problem wasn't a standard immunological rejection, but something more structural, more visceral in the compromised tissues themselves, then this blunt force approach could inflict further damage. It felt like trying to fix a delicate clock mechanism with a sledgehammer. She found herself, almost against her will, drawing closer to the bedside during a routine repositioning. As she gently adjusted the general's arm, her gloved fingers brushed the edge of the affected skin. The rigidity she'd felt earlier was not merely intensifying, it was spreading, a subtle, petrified wave radiating outward from the original graft site. It wasn't inflammation, not precisely. It was as if the underlying tissue was becoming stone, resisting the lifeblood that sought to nourish it. A phantom pain, a memory of her own searing burns, shot through her. Dr. Wei, Kateri began, her voice barely above a whisper, the tissue, it feels different from a typical rejection. It's almost calcified, in a way. And the perfusion seems to be decreasing, despite the increased vasopressors. Dr. Wei didn't even turn. Nurse Nalin, we are dealing with a severe, atypical immune response. The treatment targets cellular rejection at a molecular level. Your feeling is anecdotal. We trust the diagnostic imaging, which shows no calcification, and the lab results, which indicate a robust inflammatory cascade. Continue with your duties. Her tone was dismissive, final. Dr. Vargas, overhearing, added curtly, precision, nurse. Not intuition. This man's life hangs on precision. Kateri flinched, retreating. But the general, though heavily sedated, seemed to stir. His eyes fluttered open, dark with pain and a terrible weariness. He caught Kateri's gaze, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher passing between them, recognition. A silent plea? Then his eyes drifted shut again, the effort clearly too great. Hours bled into a terrifying eternity. The immunotherapy, instead of improving his condition, seemed to accelerate his decline. The general's fever spiked to a dangerous 105 degrees Fahrenheit. His blood pressure plummeted. The monitors began to shriek, their urgent beeps painting a chilling symphony of systemic failure. "He's crashing!" Dr. Vargas yelled, his face pale, all traces of his earlier confidence vanished. "He's going into septic shock. Get him on maximum support. Push broad-spectrum antibiotics, now." Chaos erupted. Nurses scrambled, doctors barked orders. But Kateri's eyes were fixed on the general's skin. The spreading rigidity had given way to a terrifying, mottled cyanosis. The areas she'd felt to be calcified now showed distinct, dark lesions, almost like deep burns themselves, but from within. The advanced graft rejection had not merely rejected the skin, it was actively destroying the underlying tissue at an alarming rate, a process fueled, Kateri suspected with a rising tide of horror, by the very immunotherapy designed to save him. His body was cannibalizing itself, not from infection, but from a profound, structural breakdown. "It's not just sepsis." Kateri cried out, her voice cracking, overriding the cacophony. "The tissue itself is dying. The grafts, they're collapsing inward, sealing off the capillaries. We need to address the structural integrity, not just the immune response." Dr. Wei finally rounded on her, her eyes blazing with a mixture of professional fury and rising panic. "Nurse Nalin, this is completely out of line. You are hypothesizing without any data to back it up. He is in systemic shock, a direct consequence of the overwhelming rejection. Focus on stabilizing his vitals." "But what if the shock is a symptom, not the root cause?" Kateri pleaded, her fear for the general stripping away her deference. "What if the graft itself is twisting, constricting?" The experimental techniques, they focused on tissue regeneration around the graft site, not just immune suppression. "Experimental techniques?" Dr. Vargas scoffed, even as he desperately adjusted in 4-drip. "We are in the Everest Medical Center, nurse. Not a field hospital." His words were meant to diminish, but they only served to fuel Kateri's desperate resolve. Just then, a long, piercing flatline began to sound from one of the monitors. The rhythm of the room froze. General Baraka's breathing hitched, his chest rising and falling only sporadically. The room plunged into a terrifying silence, broken only by the incessant, dire shriek of the alarm. His family, who had been huddled in the corner, let out a collective gasp of horror. His wife let out a guttural sob, collapsing into her daughter's arms. The general was dying. And Kateri knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that they were killing him with their misplaced cure. Her hands, hidden within her gloves, began to tremble uncontrollably, the ghost of her own past scars burning beneath the fabric. This wasn't just a patient anymore. This was a mirror. Kateri's story, of expertise hidden and a voice unheard, resonates deeply, doesn't it? So many of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, just like she is now. If you're rooting for Kateri, and you love powerful tales where the underdog rises, we'd be absolutely thrilled if you'd join our global community. Simply hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us immensely, allowing us to bring you more incredible, thought-provoking stories and adventures. Let's build this community together and champion these narratives of courage and innovation. We can't wait to welcome you to our family. The flatline scream tore through the sterile air, a raw, piercing testament to a life extinguishing. Time warped, each high-pitched shriek echoing Kateri's own rising panic. General Baraka's chest gave a final, shallow heave, his eyes, previously clouded with pain, now fixed on her with an uncanny intensity. It was a look of profound, desperate recognition, cutting through the chaos, through the haze of imminent death. His gaze didn't land on her face, but on her trembling, gloved hands, where the fabric had pulled taut, outlining the very scars she fought so desperately to hide. The gloves. He rasped, a sound barely audible above the alarm, yet it vibrated through Kateri's very bones. His hand, weakened, lifted slightly, a ghost of a gesture pointing towards her. Her hands. Dr. Vargas, frantic, was already shouting at the residents. Push atropine. Defibrillator, stat. He didn't hear the general, or perhaps he chose not to. But Kateri heard. She saw. The general, on the precipice of eternity, had seen past the uniform, past the protocol, past the arrogance of the elite, right into her soul. He had seen the truth hidden beneath her modesty. A profound, ancient fear seized Kateri. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, the secret she had guarded with her entire being, now on the verge of exposure. Her career, her fragile peace, everything she had built, threatened to crumble. But beneath the fear, a scorching ember of courage ignited. The general was dying. And Kateri knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that she was the only one who could stop it. The memory of the war zone, the searing pain of her own flesh burning, the desperate, audacious acts that saved her and others, it all flooded back, not as trauma, but as a map. Her hands, without conscious command, moved. With a single, decisive tug, Kateri ripped off her gloves. The stark, mottled landscape of her own burned scars, twisted and healed in defiance of conventional medicine, was laid bare for the world to see. The room gasped. Dr. Vargas paused mid-command, his eyes widening in horror, then disgust. Dr. Wei's skeptical gaze sharpened, analyzing every contour of the ravaged skin. Kateri stepped forward, her voice trembling but gaining an incredible force. "These are not just scars, General," she said, her voice cutting through the dying alarm, which now seemed to underscore her words. "These are proof. Proof that I survived a fire that should have killed me. Proof that standard treatments failed, and that in a desperate crisis, experimental techniques, unconventional methods, saved my life. And I learned them. I assisted with them. I felt them." Her voice cracked with emotion, revealing the raw wound of her past, yet paradoxically, it filled the room with an undeniable authority. "I know what this is. I know what he needs. Nurse Nalin, what in God's name are you doing?" Dr. Vargas roared, his face purpling with rage and humiliation. "Are you having a breakdown? This is insane. Anecdotal experience from a war zone does not qualify you to override decades of advanced medicine and a critical medical emergency." Dr. Wei, ever the pragmatist, interjected, "Nurse, we appreciate your empathy, but your personal history, while tragic, is not a basis for medical intervention in this institution." They moved towards Kateri, intending to remove her, to subdue her, to protect their sterile, controlled world from her messy, unconventional truth. But then, a sound that froze them all. General Baraka, his eyes now alight with a fierce, almost spiritual power, made a supreme effort. He didn't speak a full sentence, but his intent was unmistakable. His hand, still weakly raised, pointed directly at Kateri. His eyes, burning with the dying man's authority, locked onto Vargas and Wei, and his lips parted, forming a single, rasping word, "Listen." It was a command, not a plea. A dying general's last order, imbued with the weight of a lifetime of command and sacrifice. Vargas and Wei, despite their professional pride and ingrained hierarchy, faltered. To defy a living general was unthinkable. To defy a dying war hero, who had just implicitly placed his last shred of trust in this rookie nurse, felt sacrilegious. Kateri took a deep, shuddering breath. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a burning sense of purpose. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about saving a life, about honoring a trust. Her transformation was no longer a quiet internal shift, it was a loud, defiant declaration. "Stop the dopamine drip," she commanded, her voice now steady, clear, cutting through the last lingering shriek of the flatline as a resident finally silenced it. "Immediately. And prepare a sterile solution of hypertonic saline for wound lavage, chilled to precisely 10 degrees Celsius. Now. His compromised tissue is rejecting the grafts because it's suffocating. It needs to breathe. It needs to fight. This isn't a cure, it's a shock to restart the body's own defense." Vargas and Wei stared at her, then at the unresponsive general, then back at Kateri's scarred hands, which now seemed to glow with a strange, fierce power. To follow her was to shatter every protocol, every rule they had ever known. To refuse was to let the general die. In the terrifying silence, broken only by the frantic beeps of other monitors, their desperation, finally, outweighed their arrogance. "Stop the dopamine!" Vargas barked, his voice hoarse, his face a mask of disbelief and professional humiliation. "Get the saline. Quickly!" Kateri watched them move, a wave of terror and exhilaration washing over her. She had crossed a line, thrown herself into the abyss. But the general was still breathing, his gaze still fixed on her. The burden was immense, but so was the conviction that she was finally doing what was right. Her scars, once a symbol of shame, now felt like a compass, guiding her through the impossible. Her transformation from quiet nurse to reluctant leader had begun. Kateri's voice, once a quiet murmur at the periphery of their grand pronouncements, now resonated with an unexpected authority that cut through the sterile air. "Dr. Vargas, the skin around the rejection site, it's not dead, just dormant. Don't excise it completely. We need to stimulate regeneration. And for the graft, the donor tissue must be prepared in microlattices, not standard sheets. Far thinner, precisely patterned." Vargas's hand, hovering over a surgical scalpel, froze. Excising necrotic tissue was standard, the first rule of wound management. And microlattices? That sounded like something from a theoretical journal, not a practical procedure. His jaw clenched, his face a roadmap of conflicting emotions, fury at being directed by a nurse, terror for Baraka, and a grudging, terrifying flicker of hope. He looked at Dr. Wei, whose analytical gaze was fixed on Kateri, a flicker of professional curiosity warring with deep-seated skepticism. "Microlattices, Nurse Nalin?" Wei questioned, her voice tight. "That's incredibly labor-intensive, and the risk of trauma during placement is immense. We've never successfully—" "Because you're thinking of grafting onto the site," Kateri interrupted, her focus absolute, her eyes never leaving the general's pale, struggling form. "We're grafting into it. Integrating, not just covering. Dr. Lee, I need you to supervise the tissue preparation. The cellular matrix needs to be kept in a specific biosolution, room temperature, not refrigerated." Wei's brow furrowed. Room temperature? Every fiber of her medical training screamed against it. Pathogen risk, cellular degradation. But Kateri's tone brooked no argument. It wasn't arrogance, but the calm certainty of someone who had seen beyond the textbooks. The general's eyes, glazed with pain and the haze of medication, seemed to focus on Kateri, a silent plea of trust. That trust was the only currency Kateri had, and it was buying her an impossible amount of leverage. "Do it," Vargas said, his voice clipped, barely a whisper. He grabbed a different, finer scalpel as directed, his movements stiff with resentment, yet undeniably precise. Kateri was already at the general's side, her gloved hands, once a source of quiet curiosity, now the instruments of their last hope. "The rejection is driven by a deep cellular memory of trauma," Kateri explained, her voice surprisingly gentle as she began to prepare the compromised skin, not cutting, but delicately abrading, teasing the surface with a tool Vargas had never seen in a standard surgical kit. It looked more like a jeweler's implement. "We need to reset that memory, not just replace the tissue. Minimal invasive contact, maximum cellular stimulation." Vargas watched, mesmerized despite himself. Kateri's touch was unlike anything he'd witnessed. His own hands, powerful and skilled, were accustomed to force, to decisive incisions. Kateri's moved with an ethereal delicacy, coaxing, persuading, almost listening to the tissue under her touch. She worked with the quiet intensity of an artist, her scarred hands moving with an intuitive grace that defied explanation. He saw her dip a swab into a small, unlabeled vial, applying a substance that wasn't in their inventory. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Kateri didn't look up. "A proprietary regenerative serum. Developed in crisis, perfected in desperation. It won't be in any catalog, Dr. Vargas. Just trust me." Trust her. The words felt like sandpaper on his raw professional pride. Yet, as Kateri's fingers, swift and sure, began to place the first delicate microlattices, a tremor went through Vargas. He saw how the tiny, intricate patterns seemed to align, almost magnetically, with the abraded surface, adhering with a tenacity that defied their fragility. There was no forceful pressing, no suture. Just a touch, a whisper, and the tissue seemed to drink it in. Wei, observing the donor tissue preparation, found herself equally unnerved. The cellular matrix was indeed responsive at room temperature, almost pulsing with a strange vitality. She monitored the general's vitals. Against all odds, they weren't plummeting further. The sepsis markers, though still critical, showed a minute, almost imperceptible plateau. It was impossible, illogical, yet happening before her very eyes. The tension in the room was a living, breathing entity, coiling tighter with every impossible instruction Kateri gave, every unconventional step she took. The medical team moved like automatons, their eyes wide with bewilderment and a dawning, terrifying awe. They were not performing surgery, they were assisting in a ritual, guided by a nurse whose hands, scarred and fearless, were rewriting the rules of life and death. Kateri's movements became a silent prayer, each touch a covenant with life. She leaned closer, her breath misting slightly on the sterile field, her eyes fixed on the ravaged canvas of the general's body. The air thrummed with a sacred tension as she lifted the final, intricate piece of prepared graft tissue. It was a marvel, gossamer thin, yet pulsing with an almost visible energy, ready to bridge the chasm of cellular death. Her hands, scarred maps of her own survival, placed it with an exquisite delicacy that defied the brutal reality of the operating room. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just an absolute certainty born of intimate, painful knowledge. As the tissue settled, something extraordinary happened. A ripple, almost imperceptible, seemed to pass through the general's skin, an echo of life responding to life. It was not a violent, sudden change, but a slow, quiet unfolding, like a flower turning towards the sun after a long night. On the vital signs monitor, a subtle but unmistakable shift occurred. The precipitous plummet of his blood pressure hesitated, then began a reluctant, inch-by-inch climb back toward stability. The frantic, erratic rhythm of his heart eased, finding a new, stronger beat. The sepsis markers, which had been screaming red alerts for days, actually retreated, their angry numbers dimming to a less menacing hue. Dr. Vargas, who had been leaning forward, his posture rigid with a desperate, professional skepticism, let out a choked sound. It was not a word, but a guttural expulsion of disbelief, a sound that held the weight of every lost cause, every failed attempt, every moment of professional pride now dissolving into bewildered awe. His eyes, usually cool and confident, were wide, glistening with an emotion he rarely allowed himself, raw, fragile hope. Dr. Wei, ever the pragmatist, was staring at the monitors as if they were performing a magic trick. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, then stared again. The data was undeniable. Her analytical mind, accustomed to patterns and predictable outcomes, was grappling with an anomaly that defied every textbook, every protocol. A faint, incredulous smile touched her lips, not one of amusement, but of profound, bewildered wonder. It's holding," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hushed reverence of the room. "The vascularization, it's almost instantaneous." A wave of collective relief, so potent it was almost tangible, washed over the surgical team. Shoulders slumped, hands that had been clenched white-knuckled on instruments loosened. Nurses openly wept, their silent tears a testament to the emotional siege they had endured. The air, which moments ago had been thick with impending doom, now felt lighter, infused with a breathless, fragile victory. Kateri finally straightened, a tremor running through her exhausted frame. Her eyes, clouded with intense concentration moments before, now held a deep, quiet triumph. She looked at the general, still pale, still dangerously fragile, but undeniably alive, pulling back from the precipice. A profound emotional catharsis swept over her. All the pain of her past, the hidden shame of her scars, the silent battles against disbelief and dismissal, it all culminated in this moment. The desperate child in the burning city, the intuitive assistant in a makeshift clinic, the rookie nurse ignored by giants, all found their voice, their validation, in the steadying beat of General Baraka's heart. She met Dr. Vargas's gaze. His arrogance had melted away, replaced by an expression of humbling respect, a silent apology in his stunned eyes. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. "Nurse Nalin," he said, his voice husky, devoid of its usual booming authority. You did it." Dr. Wei stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch Kateri's arm, a gesture of rare warmth from the stoic doctor. "Kateri," she said, using her first name for the first time, her voice thick with emotion, "you've rewritten the playbook. You've shown us a different way." The room was no longer just an operating theater, it was a sanctuary of improbable victory. The impossible had just become reality. General Baraka was not out of danger, not yet, but he was stabilized. He was on the path back from the brink, guided by the scarred hands of a quiet nurse who had defied death itself. The tension had broken, replaced by a deep, collective sigh of awe and gratitude. It was a triumph not just of medicine, but of humanity, of listening to the quiet voice, of finding light in the darkest places. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptics and adrenaline, now hummed with something else, a fragile, exhilarating hope. The impossible had just become reality. General Baraka was not out of danger, not yet, but he was stabilized. He was on the path back from the brink, guided by the scarred hands of a quiet nurse who had defied death itself. The tension had broken, replaced by a deep, collective sigh of awe and gratitude. It was a triumph not just of medicine, but of humanity, of listening to the quiet voice, of finding light in the darkest places. Dr. Li Wei was the first to fully articulate the shift. She stepped closer to Kateri, her usual scientific detachment replaced by an expression of profound wonder. Her eyes, usually scanning data with laser precision, now held an almost maternal warmth. "Kateri," she repeated, her voice softer than anyone in Everest Medical had ever heard it, you've shown us that there are forces at play we don't yet understand. That sometimes, instinct born of true experience trumps textbooks." She reached out, not to Kateri's arm this time, but her scarred hand, gently turning it over. "These," Dr. Wei murmured, tracing the intricate landscape of scar tissue, "these are not just injuries. They are a map. A map to healing." Dr. Mateo Vargas, however, remained rooted to his spot, a complex storm brewing behind his charismatic facade. His face, usually a canvas of supreme confidence, was now a mask of bewildered respect. He looked from the monitor, showing the general's improving vitals, to Kateri's unassuming figure, and back again. The weight of his own earlier dismissals, his confident pronouncements of failure, seemed to press down on him. His ego, an Everest in its own right, was visibly crumbling. Finally, he took a deep, shaky breath and approached Kateri, his usual swagger replaced by a hesitant step. "Nurse Nalin," he began, the name feeling strangely formal on his tongue after Dr. Wei's familiarity. He cleared his throat. "Kateri. I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but a gesture of apology and acknowledgement. "What you did in there, it wasn't just a procedure. It was a revelation. It was artistry. I've never seen anything like it." The admission, coming from the Everest's golden boy, was more profound than any praise. It was a surrender of pride, a genuine bow to superior knowledge. Kateri, for her part, met their gaze with the same quiet humility that had defined her since she arrived. The triumph didn't swell her chest with pride, but rather settled in her heart as a profound sense of relief and a quiet confirmation. "It wasn't just me, Dr. Vargas," she replied softly, her voice still tinged with exhaustion but firm. "It was the team. Every sterile instrument, every precise cut you made, Dr. Wei's monitoring, the general's incredible will to live. I just had a piece of the puzzle no one else had seen before." Her eyes flickered to her scarred hands, then back to their faces. "A piece forged in a different kind of fire." General Baraka, though still weak, managed a faint smile. His gaze, however, held an intensity that belied his physical state. "A different kind of fire indeed, Nurse Nalin," he rasped, his voice gaining a fraction of its former strength. Tell them where that piece of the puzzle came from. Tell them what these hands have truly seen." He knew. He had seen the war in her eyes, felt the echoes of shared trauma. Kateri hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the room, the once skeptical nurses, the astonished residents, the humbled surgeons. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, yet simultaneously longed for. It wasn't about showing off, it was about explaining who she was, not just what she knew. Taking another breath, she began, her voice gaining a quiet resonance that commanded attention. I survived a bombing, in a war zone, years ago. Most of my family didn't. Her voice wavered for a moment, but she steadied it. I was badly burned. Given up for dead, really. But there was a field surgeon, a renegade, working with whatever he could scavenge. He was experimenting with tissue regeneration, grafting techniques that sounded impossible, even then. Desperate times, desperate measures. She held up her scarred hands. He saved my life. And during my recovery, when I could barely move, I assisted him. I saw how he felt the tissue, how he coaxed the body to accept what it usually rejected. I became his extra pair of hands, his eyes, his intuition when his own failed from exhaustion. She looked directly at Dr. Vargas and Dr. Wei. I learned on myself. I learned in a place where standard protocols were luxuries we couldn't afford. Where the rulebook was rewritten daily just to keep people alive. Her story, raw and deeply personal, painted a vivid picture not just of a technique, but of resilience, of a profound human connection forged in the crucible of suffering. It wasn't a credential from a university, it was a testament of survival, empathy, and hands-on, life-or-death innovation. The revelation hung in the air, transforming their understanding of Kateri. She wasn't just a nurse with a hidden skill, she was a living testament to humanity's capacity for survival and ingenuity under the most extreme conditions. Her humility wasn't a mask, it was the ingrained perspective of someone who had faced death and found grace in the small, improbable victories. The doctors didn't just see her expertise now, they saw the soul behind it, the profound personal cost that had forged her into the healer she was. The whispers began, not of gossip, but of genuine awe, spreading through the operating room like a gentle, warming current. Kateri Nalin, the quiet, gloved rookie, had not just saved a general, she had quietly, humbly, redefined heroism in the halls of Everest Medical. Her scars, once hidden in shame, were now beacons of unparalleled expertise, courage, and a new beginning. The success of the operation rippled through Everest Medical, an earthquake that shook its very foundations of rigid dogma and unyielding hierarchy. Dr. Mateo Vargas, initially shell-shocked by the undeniable triumph of Kateri's unconventional methods, found himself confronting a mirror he had assiduously avoided. His charisma, once a shield for a hidden insecurity, now felt hollow. The accolades he chased seemed meaningless compared to the quiet, profound reverence he now felt for Kateri. He began to listen differently, to see his team, not just direct them. He sought Kateri out, not with the charming platitudes he offered socialites, but with a humble, almost hesitant request, "Kateri, tell me more." "How did you know?" It was an admission of his own limitations, a vulnerable opening that promised a shift from an arrogant maestro to a collaborative leader, eager to learn from every corner. Dr. Li Wei, ever the scientist, processed the data of Kateri's success with painstaking rigor. Her skepticism, once a wall, had crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Kateri's field for tissue wasn't magic, it was an applied understanding so granular, so deeply ingrained by direct, desperate experience, that it bypassed the need for complex instruments. Wei began to design studies, not to debunk, but to understand and codify Kateri's intuitive techniques. The vast, untapped potential of experiential knowledge now fascinated her, transforming her rigid scientific approach into one that sought to bridge the gap between empirical data and human intuition. She saw Kateri not as a junior nurse, but as a groundbreaking, albeit untraditional, pioneer whose insights could rewrite textbooks. General Baraka's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Within weeks, the livid inflammation receded, replaced by healthy, regenerating tissue. His spirit, once dimmed by resignation, blazed anew. He had faced death countless times on battlefields, but this quiet, unassuming nurse had pulled him back from a different kind of abyss. He became Kateri's staunchest advocate, his deep, resonant voice cutting through any lingering doubt. "This woman," he declared in a meeting of the hospital board, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces, "she represents the future of medicine. Not just what we know, but what we are willing to learn from the most unexpected places." For Kateri, the transformation was profound. The day General Baraka was stable enough to receive visitors in his private suite, Kateri walked in, for the first time, without her gloves. Her hands, a tapestry of intricate scars, were openly visible. She felt the warmth of the air on her skin, a sensation she hadn't truly experienced in years. The general looked at them, then at her face, and simply nodded, a shared understanding passing between them that transcended words. Her scars were no longer symbols of past trauma and hidden shame, but powerful badges of survival, expertise, and a lived experience that had saved a life. Her offer to train was met with immediate, enthusiastic acceptance. Dr. Vargas, with Dr. Way's backing, spearheaded the creation of a new experiential tissue reconstruction unit, with Kateri at its heart. She wasn't just a nurse anymore, she was a specialized lead, a mentor, teaching resident surgeons and nurses the nuanced language of compromised tissue, the subtle cues of inflammation, the art of intuitive touch. Her initial shyness faded, replaced by a quiet authority born of her unique knowledge. She still wore her humble demeanor, but it was now underscored by an unwavering confidence. Everest Medical Center, once a bastion of conventional excellence, began to evolve. The culture shifted, slowly but surely, towards a greater openness to unconventional wisdom, to valuing diverse perspectives, and to understanding that true innovation often emerged from the edges, not just the center. Kateri's story became a legend, a living testament that courage wasn't just found in battlefields, but also in challenging entrenched beliefs, and trusting one's lived experience, and in the quiet strength of empathy. Kateri Nalin, the quiet, gloved rookie, had not just saved a general, she had quietly, humbly, redefined heroism in the halls of Everest Medical. Her scars, once hidden in shame, were now beacons of unparalleled expertise, courage, and a new beginning. They were a vivid reminder that the greatest healing often came not from the absence of wounds, but from the wisdom gained in surviving them, and the courage to share that wisdom for the benefit of all. She had found her authentic life, inspiring a new era of hope, humility, and human-centered growth in elite medicine. So, what hidden strengths or unconventional paths have you found led to your greatest triumphs, dear viewer? Kateri's story reminds us that true healing and innovation often stem from courageously embracing our unique experiences and challenging dogma. If her journey resonated deeply, we warmly invite you to subscribe and join our growing global community. Together, we can explore more powerful narratives that uplift and inspire. Your support truly helps us bring more meaningful stories like Kateri's to life. Thank you so much for watching, for being part of our journey, and for valuing the profound impact of human stories. We truly appreciate you.